Welcome back to Mortgage Markets and More. I'm your host, Pete D'Angelo from Rate. I hope you're all having a great week. We're going to dive into appraisals. We've talked about it in the past, but I thought a good refresher would be helpful right now. So we're going to talk about appraisals. We're going to talk about appraisal waivers again, what they really mean, and then give you some key takeaways so that if you're shopping in this market, you could be successful and kind of arm yourself with a little more knowledge. And if you're a real estate professional, feel free to share this with your clients. This could be helpful to help them to understand more about the process and while they're shopping for a home, the things that could be important to consider when they're offering. So first off, we're going to talk about what's an appraisal. An appraisal is a confirmation of the home's value. And the appraisal is an opinion of value by a licensed and trained professional, by an appraiser. The appraiser will go to a property, inspect the home. They'll check it out, take pictures, take measurements of the rooms. They'll take photos of the exterior and the interior. Then they'll go and they'll do some market research. They're going to look at something called comparable sales. These are homes that have sold recently close to that property that they are appraising. We're going to look at those home sales, see what they were closed and what the purchase prices were for them, and then compare them to the subject property. They're going to put that all into a report that gets provided to the lender and to you as a buyer. Legally, there's a requirement to deliver that report to you. And these are the only parties that are involved. This appraisal does not go to anyone else. It just goes to you as the client and to the lender for their confirmation and for their documentation purposes for your mortgage. They will adjust certain things on the appraisal report as needed through the lending guidelines, but that's essentially, in a nutshell, what an appraisal report is. It confirms the value for you based on the market trends and what homes have sold for recently. What are some of the key aspects that are detailed in the appraisal? They're going to look at the size of the property, square footage. They're going to look at the lot size. How big is the actual real property? They're going to look at the condition of the property. They're going to give it a category. C1, brand new construction. C2, recently renovated. C3, good, lived in though. C4, we could probably use with doing some updates now. C5, you need work. This home is stuck in the 1970s, so it needs to be updated. Something along those lines, right? They will also look at the location of the property. That will play an effect. And I mean, even as detailed down to, is the property on a main road? Is there a double yellow line when you leave that driveway? That's going to impact the value. So they are taking into account not just the town and the market. And from that standpoint, they're going to look at the actual location. Even things like there are some intangibles, like if a property, let's say, is within 150 feet of a train, like a railway, if a train goes by, that could impact value. So they look at all of these things. Then they compare them to other homes sold in that market. The standard form is called a Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, URAR, URAR. And there's a standardized format that you'll see. It's pretty confusing to look at as a consumer. I know for myself as a mortgage professional, it took me probably a few months of reviewing these reports to really get my head wrapped around them. But once you get your head wrapped around it, it's pretty straightforward with how they're taken care of. And also, my job as a lender is to make sure that you understand. So, if I'm working with you, we'll go through that appraisal report so you can understand it to whatever level you would like. I want to take this moment to just take a break talking about appraisals to make sure I clearly identify a distinction. The distinction is appraisal inspection and home inspection. They are not the same. An appraisal inspection takes a look at the home and verifies the value of that home. A home inspection takes a look at the actual parts of the property and inspects them to ensure that there's no problems, deficiencies, or health and safety hazards. So this is going to kind of break down like your appraisal inspection tells you about the value of the home and a little bit about the condition. The home inspection tells you all about the condition of the property and what you're going to need to fix. Very likely. A good home inspector is going to tell you a bunch of stuff that's wrong because they want to make sure that you're informed before you proceed. The appraisal is necessary for the lending. The home inspection is not necessary, but always highly recommended and encouraged. The appraisal impacts your loan approval possibly, and the home inspection does not, unless it has implications for how you're negotiating your contract. So I just want to make a quick distinction between those two things because sometimes it does get confusing, especially as a first-time homebuyer. You're hearing inspections, you're hearing these things, and there's multiple different types. So just wanted to make sure we had that clarified for you. Now we're going to talk about the appraisal waivers. So we talked about having an appraisal, but what if you don't need one? And how do you know if you're not going to need one? Well, that's where I come in. Your lending professional will let you know if the property you're purchasing qualifies for an appraisal waiver, if you and the property qualify for an appraisal waiver. It's not exclusively the property, and it's not exclusively you as a home buyer. So our underwriting systems, they're computer systems that are automated that we load loan information into, including the property address and the purchase price. If the purchase price is within a reasonable margin from the data that these systems have from past completed appraisals on maybe that property in prior transactions, could be any time over the past 15 years, or other homes sold in that market, that appraisal data is uploaded into these systems. And so then the system's able to let you know if you qualify for an appraisal waiver. That would mean that you don't need to pay for an appraisal or have an appraisal inspection done on the property. So who qualifies for these waivers? First, property type needs to be considered. It's mostly single-family homes and some condos. Down payment requirements. This was just loosened up a little bit, but before you needed to have 20% down to be eligible for these appraisal waivers. Now there's been a system update. It is attainable if you're putting as little as 10% down. Credit score. Typically, you're going to want to have a credit score 700 or higher. Then you're going to be in good shape for the potential for an appraisal waiver. The loan-to-value ratio, that's impacted by your down payment, but I wanted to make a distinction because you may hear these terms used. Loan-to-value ratio is comparing your mortgage amount to the value of the property. Your down payment will inform your loan-to-value ratio. For example, if you put 20% down, your loan-to-value ratio is 80%. So when I was mentioning about the down payment, that's essentially another way of saying this. If you're going to put 10% down, your loan-to-value ratio is going to be, 90%. So loan-to-value ratio is typically closer to 80%. You're going to have a higher likelihood of success, but it could be as high as 90%. Then the property data. So if the property hasn't been sold recently, and let's say the past 15 to 17 years, it's probably not going to qualify for a waiver. The other types of loans or properties that this appraisal waiver will not work for categorically, jumbo loans. It's not going to work if you have a jumbo loan. If you're purchasing a co-op, a new construction, or a unique home, it's not going to work. And then loans over $1 million, they're going to require an appraisal for that. Even though those are the stipulations for what won't work, this is still pretty widely available, and I am seeing it more and more as time is going on. Now we're going to discuss the difference between the appraisal waiver and an appraisal waiver on the contingency. Again, this is another distinction. Like we talked about appraisal inspection, home inspection difference. Now we're going to talk about appraisal waiver and appraisal contingency waiver to break them down. So we talked about the appraisal waivers from the underwriting system. Now, what's an appraisal contingency waiver? That is when you're placing an offer on a home and you tell the seller, I'm offering you, let's say, $500,000 for this home, and I am waiving my appraisal contingency. If you were not to do that, you would be submitting an offer with an appraisal contingency, which means you're communicating to the seller that the home needs to appraise at that purchase price. Otherwise, we're renegotiating this contract. In this competitive market, that doesn't really fly very much. A lot of transactions are, and a lot of offers are structured with some semblance of an appraisal contingency waiver. And that means that you're telling the seller, on the other hand, hey, whatever the appraisal comes in at, I'm still buying this property from you for $500,000. So that's what an appraisal contingency waiver is. When we compare the two, one is on the lending side, one is part of your contract negotiation. We will be the one to tell you if you're able to have an appraisal waiver and not have an appraisal inspection performed. You will be able to work with your real estate agent and your attorney on the appraisal contingency waiver in your contract, and they'll be able to guide you as to what would be the best way to put that in your offer and in your contract. Only a lender can approve a true appraisal waiver, but anyone can approve the terms of their contract waiving the appraisal contingency. So here are some of the pros and cons when we're talking about appraisal waivers. The benefits, if you have an appraisal waiver from your lender, number one, you're saving around $550 to $650 because you do not need to pay for an appraisal report. Secondly, it speeds up the process tremendously. On average, I think the statistics show you save around 7 to 10 days on your process. That's pretty amazing. Then because of the fewer days needed, there's fewer level of paperwork. There's fewer documents needed because when we get everything updated right then and there, we don't have to wait, and there's not really as much of an opportunity for us to need to update information on your loan file. So that even double compounds the speed that's available to you when you have that appraisal waiver. Now, some of the risks on the appraisal waivers. Well, property may be a little bit overvalued if the algorithm is off at all. Overvalued is a tough concept in this current market. What does overvalued mean? We've seen values move around a ton. We're going to have to see. But that is still a risk. Older, unique, and poorly documented homes can be inaccurately priced. And that means that sometimes that could preclude the access to an appraisal waiver altogether. But if there's a unique home, maybe the appraisal waiver isn't coming through because that uniqueness can't really get captured by numbers and by data, let's say. At least not right now. Then there's market volatility. That's the other possible con when it comes to the appraisal waivers. If there's mismatches in the system and the value estimates, I think the pros far outweigh the cons. And of course, now to specifically talk about the pros and cons of having an appraisal contingency waiver, not putting that in your contract, well, then if the home under appraises, you could be on the hook for additional down payment. We offer a particular solution that's an appraisal gap guarantee. Super helpful and super powerful. So there are ways to navigate it. Just make sure you're working with the right lending professional. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about that. And then there's an agent tip here. So you're going to always want to check with your lender. So I could tell you, you can find out at the offer stage about an appraisal waiver. It's possible. That's something that I can do. That's something that I do. And it proves to be very valuable and helpful. So this one goes out to my agents out there. Make sure you check with your lender about what the possibility is for an appraisal waiver and if they can confirm that as early as possible in the process. And today I'm going to wrap this up with a fun fact for you, okay? Particularly because we're talking about appraisal waivers in 2023. So this is, almost 2 years ago now. 17% of Freddie Mac loans received appraisal waivers. So if we were to add up how much that cost would have been for all the appraisals that were not performed, that's $150 million. That's pretty crazy. So that's our fun fact for today. And that's all of our information for appraisal waivers. I hope you found this helpful, useful, and informative. If you have any questions or would like more detailed information on anything, please reach out anytime. You can reach me on my email at peter.d'angelo@gmail.com. You can feel free to follow me on socials. Please like, share, subscribe. If you or anyone you know is interested in buying, selling, and would find this information helpful, please be sure to share it. I look forward to getting you your next update. But in the meantime, have a great day, great rest of your week, and take good care.